Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Do We Solve It podcast. I'm your host, Dan Johnson, and today I have an incredible guest for you. The indomitable Tim Clarke will be joining us in a moment to talk about affordable housing. Let's actually bring him right on. Mr. Tim Clarke, welcome to the How Do We Solve It podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be on.
Absolutely. It is great to have you on here. When you brought up the topic of affordable housing, I was kind of thrilled. I know a little bit about this topic. I don't know a ton. But what I do know about affordable housing is at least in North Carolina, there are only 43 available rentals for every 100 extremely low income renter households.
Yeah.
And it looks like looking at the average rental price, average monthly wage. I think your rent is supposed to be no more than a third of your average wage.
Technically, it's supposed to be a quarter. So you're talking mortgage terms, front to back ratio.
Ooh,
Yeah, actually,
okay.
26% of your housing expenses shouldn't be no more. It shouldn't be no more than 26% of your monthly income. Your back ratio is actually it's a 38%, which includes like credit cards and car payments and stuff like that. So
Wow.
if you're at a 33%, then you're already not even qualified to buy, which is horrible.
Which is crazy because if I look at it looks like rent in Durham increased by 21%. And the worst case the Department of Housing and Urban Development releases a worst case needs report every year. And the most recent worst case needs report basically said there's 8 million people who can't afford housing in
Yes,
America.
yes.
So tell me a little bit about how did you get interested in affordable housing? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up in an impoverished area in Brooklyn, New York, and my mom, moved us to North Carolina. So I lived in Durham, which was a slightly less impoverished area, but still some of the same inner city issues. And I uh, went through high school, went to college, graduated, and came back, and I kind of wanted to make a difference. I've seen a lot of people who look like me that has a lot of potential, but because of their environment, their options were severely cut short. So yeah, I got into real estate. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because part of the reason my last appointment before this podcast was actually a mixed couple that they met me. They bought their first house, and they both were from similar backgrounds as me, and both ex-military, and the disability stuff that comes with that, mental and physical. And they just thought, hey, we're gonna fulfill that American dream and buy our first house. And I remember at the closing day, I was like, "You're not done." And he was like, "What do you mean? Like, we're gonna stay here forever?" And I was like, "No, that's not the best idea." Long story short, they're in their third house now, and that house has over 500,000 in equity. And a very similar conversation we had, like literally not an hour before I came here, about uh, how the economy has changed so much. So going back to when I first started in '07, we had one of the worst economic crises and crises in our country. And when COVID
Yeah,
hit, it was
2008 was no joke to start a realty business then.
oh, it was a horrible idea. I mean, every dollar I sank into, my business like just went away. It was the craziest thing. It was almost as if it was like I was getting signs that I shouldn't be doing it. It was like I still haven't learned my lesson. Um, but yeah, but because of that, I got a firm foundation of how the housing market um, plays a role in our economy and how ubiquitous housing is, and everyone needing shelter. And so taking that from a kid that's been in inner city impoverished area, and working with affluent, individuals, almost on a daily basis. It's kind of mind blowing, but at the same time, I feel like I'm in a privileged position to pay it forward. So in this market, since the pandemic hit, um, the real estate market was already going well. Um, Inventory has been steadily declining since the recession. Less and less people wanted to sell. More people were thinking, "Oh, if I jump into the market, then I won't have a place to live." So it was just a reciprocal issue, and there was other things that was added to it. But ultimately, what happened was when um, the well during the pandemic and a little bit after the pandemic, the market just kind of just went parabolic, and um, property values went through the roof. And even though there was no inventory, builders have been building like crazy. Um, in some of the areas that I lived in Durham and part of Raleigh, where there were low income housing, you'll see multi-million dollar houses in that same neighborhood, like on that same street. And one would ask, two questions: how is that possible? Like, who would pay that much for a house on the street? And two, where does all those other people go? I mean, if you take the low income areas and then you kick them out, you gentrify them, where do they go? And in this market, they go to the more rural areas. And um, so the rural areas of the triangle has been pretty much the haven for people who aren't affluent. So not only just lower income housing or lower income families, but also first time home buyers. People who are buying in the two, three, even $400,000 range for the first time have to go into the in the rural areas.
So, talk a little bit about what what happened since COVID to the affordable housing issue. Like pre-COVID, the affordable housing was an issue. It's primarily an issue in growing cities like Raleigh, which you're
Mhm.
from, Raleigh, North Carolina, and or Durham. You live in Raleigh or you live in Durham?
I live in Raleigh.
Okay,
Service
so
Durham as well.
the Raleigh Durham area at the very least, and the other cities in like San Francisco, Los Angeles, places like that, they were already bad prior to COVID.
Yeah.
What did COVID do to the affordability of housing, not just for the average person who now wanted more rooms because I need an office for both people to work from home, but to the people who couldn't afford housing in the first place?
Well, you kind of touched on it about people working from home. So buyer needs have changed, meaning you no longer have to go to the office, so you don't have to worry about commute times, which means you can probably live on the other side of the country and still keep your job. Another thing that changed was, people being locked up in their house for extended periods of time. Not only are you antsy about getting out of the house, you also have the ability to save money because you're not going out to bars, you're not going out to restaurants. So a lot of people had a chance to save money. Another thing was, we had a lot of these hedge funds that were jumping into the real estate market, the residential real estate market, and buying up stuff. So, in addition to having, uh, an abundance of qualified buyers, you also have major corporations that jumped into the mix, and then you have multiple offers, and that ultimately goes into a crazy appreciation rate. I remember Durham, you said the rents have gone up, what, 18%. The housing values in Durham has gone up 22%. So it just caused, it was like a perfect storm, with an already like lagging inventory. They just kind of made it worse. So what has been happening is, builders have jumped in and say, hey, we can kind of fix this inventory issue. And honestly, builders, it's not enough for builders. It's um, we have had one of the lowest foreclosure rates um, throughout this whole ordeal. I remember one of the reasons was the moratorium, but once that expired, um, there, because of the property values have gone up, um, people can just refinance rather than or sell their house rather than undergoing foreclosure. So um, usually when the market corrects in that regard, there's a bunch of cheaper homes that have been repossessed that are now available some way to get in on a fixer upper or whatever, or some other opportunities other than what just hits the MLS. And now that just haven't been the case. So um, yeah, the people who were just on the bubble of buying no longer able to buy, and it's super unfortunate. So that's what's going on all over the country, not just here in Raleigh, Durham.
So, how do we tackle the problem of housing affordability? Because you think about some of the previous approaches to this issue. So you look at the projects,
Hmm.
right? These were all government projects to try and tackle housing affordability. And there's been some effort to prevent like what they called white flight.
Yeah,
So gentrification, particularly back in the 60s and back in the 70s, there was some effort to keep people from leaving the city, essentially, or keep people who are in their homes in the city. Doesn't seem like any of that has really worked. And so
yeah,
you look at Raleigh, or Raleigh's actually probably an interesting case study because Raleigh is a fast growing city and really hasn't had this kind of growth,
right.
as I understand it, in the past, most of its history. So what what do we do about this affordable housing problem if we're in a city that's dealing with a lot of growth?
Well, I can tell you that one of the issues that we have is that we don't have the infrastructure for a population boom. Um, so to rezone certain inner city areas so you can add more units would be pretty much the easiest thing to do because the government would approve it. You can have builders come in. Let's say if hypothetically that was the case, then you would have overpopulation of you know lower income families. Um, Now that is not the case because property values have gone up. So, like I was saying before, um, you know, a lot of those homes in those inner city areas and the lower income areas are pretty much worth more with the house torn down. And a builder will build something 3 or 4 times the value. Um, so that has been an issue, and that's been a hot button item for literally every legislator or any politician, period, locally, to try to get more votes or whatever. Um,
So
what
why don't we just build up? Like there
it's
seems to be plenty of
so
space directly upwards. So why don't we just build up?
well that's one solution, and then I mean it's not like it's all owned by the government, right? So this is has to be fueled somewhat by capitalism, and I know that there has been a lot of tax breaks and stuff like that to entice investors to try to build up and build out. Um, but that just haven't happened, and again, we don't have the infrastructure for um, that much, growth. So we're kind of managing it. Um, I know in some of the smaller towns, water is the biggest issue. So even though you have areas like Zebulon or Creedmoor, a lot of those rural areas that builders are building in, they're building heavy, and people moving out there because it's affordable. Um, they don't have the utilities to keep up. So, let's say downtown Raleigh, for example, if they were just to build up and, um, first off, you would have to have a lot of interested sellers who are willing to give up their properties. to let the project happen, or if there's some sort of eminent domain, to take it back and create opportunities there. You still have the issue of how much is it going to cost, and frankly, it's just not feasible. I have a couple of affordable housing ideas that could work. In fact, we were working on one last summer that we may pick up again because we've gotten approvals from our the county here, Wake County in Durham. Um, but yeah, so eh,
Tell
because
tell us
building
tell us
materials. So
tell
what?
us a little bit about that. Like
So yeah,
what does that
because
look like?
building materials are really expensive still, relatively. Um, you know, one of the things we could do is build with containers, with shipping containers. I've done a lot of research on uh, the types of containers that could be used. There are actually some that are prefabbed, that has the kitchen and all that kind of stuff. And you can put them together like Legos and put insulation, and boom, you have a house. That is a fraction of the time and the cost that it would take to build one of those ADUs, or the smaller 700 or 800 square foot houses that our city need. You can also do multi-unit houses with the containers. Another idea I had was there's a couple companies going around with 3D printers that literally prints out concrete. It lays concrete like toothpaste, like it goes around. Um, the problem with that is no one has yet to achieve a certificate of occupancy with a built house. And we have a couple ideas of how we can, kind of get over that hurdle. Kind of seems a little
Why
bit.
why haven't why haven't they been able to get a certificate of occupancy?
Well,
Is
permitting
that
is an issue. So,
are our laws not caught up to 3D printing concrete?
no, we're not, and no, and neither are the builders. A lot of the builders I talked to about this, they were like, it's just, real estate is so the process, pretty much everything in real estate is so antiquated. When you come with a new idea, people just look at you funny. But that is the best way. It would definitely be more expensive on the permitting side because you'd literally have to have someone from the city or whoever is pulling the permits on site the entire time. But you're talking about maybe a 2 or 3 week build process versus an 8 to 12 month build process. Um,
So you
so
get so you get the local government to allow for rezoning essentially for the builders, or is this or your suggestion is out in the rural communities where it's going to take, or the outlying suburbs of a community where it's going to take 8 9 months, 12 months, whatever, to build a new home, that you just start rolling out 3D printed or container houses in the rural communities?
yeah, yeah, it's simple. It's pretty quick, and they're sustainable. I mean, they've have a ton of those 3D printed structures in Europe. Um, yeah, I mean it's not new tech by any means. It's definitely a new concept to the building world. But you know,
How much, so it saves you time, right? So 9 to 12 months down to a couple weeks, which is
yeah.
awesome. So does it save money? Like how much cheaper are these 3D printed homes as
Oh, you
opposed to a
talking about
similar?
anywhere from, you know, 75 to like 85% less than it would normally cost. You're the biggest expense is concrete, which it's concrete. It's not that expensive. And, with the right machines, and there's several of them, I've seen at least a half a dozen different designs for these 3D printers.
Now, are
Um,
these homes going to be livable, or are they going to be like Soviet era Russia
no, 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 no.
communist
So yeah,
blocks?
we definitely doesn't don't live in a Soviet country. That's thank God for that. But Yeah, our building codes and standards are very high. So when you get issued a certificate of occupancy, that means that that house is livable, is clean, there's no asbestos or any crazy stuff like that. The house is not going to fall apart. And the houses that have tried. There's a company in New York. There's another one in Texas that they both are trying it, but the reason why they didn't get the certificate of occupancy wasn't because of the structure. It wasn't, it's because they missed something in the process that wasn't permanent. So,
Mm,
or it could be, you know, access for maintenance issues. So, like, if a pipe bursts, you can't get behind the concrete, stuff like that.
mm,
So yeah, I mean, there's several different ways to get around that in the design itself.
mm. Interesting. So what about the shipping containers? If you were to choose between the shipping containers and the 3D printed concrete, which of these would you want to go with to address, affordable housing issues?
I say ultimately a 3D printed route would be the most affordable, the most scalable process. But you know, uh, shipping containers is they're just like Legos. You put them together and you won't have any issues or permitting. Um, I think the most imminent solution would be shipping containers.
Do you think that and how much are we talking for these shipping containers? Like, if I'm assuming you buy one shipping container for a house, or do you like put them together like you
Yeah, yeah.
create your
One
own?
one shipping container, if my memory serves correctly, is around anywhere from 800 to 1,000 square feet.
It's a nice
So
apartment.
yeah, and I mean, if you had two, I mean, you can make it pretty nice. Um,
And can we do insulation so we're not like the cat in the hot tin roof?
yeah, yeah, no, no, you can, if they're built correctly, you can actually get mortgage loans on them, as real property. Yeah, it'll be
Wow.
yeah. Both solutions will be affixed to the property. So it'll be considered as real property. Real and personal property are separate. Personal property is like a refrigerator or a microwave or something like that. Real property is the door that's attached to the house, or most notably the stove that's attached to the house, or something that's permanently affixed to the house. Pool, that's a real property. So a mobile home, for example, a mobile home is very difficult to get financed because number one, it still has a VIN number because it's a mobile home, and it has an axle, but for the most part, it's not attached to the property. So both solutions are affixed to the property and could be counted as such. So yeah, I mean container homes is just and they make them prefab. You can buy them anywhere from 5 to 15 grand per container, so super cheap. Um, I've seen some used for like 2 grand. The only issue with the used ones, if you don't know if it's been contaminated. So
Hmm.
um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's really cheap, and that will combat the rising property values even in the lower income areas.
If you get it furnished and like actually put together, what do you estimate the total cost of that's going to be? 'Cause it's like 1,000 for the container, but you've also got the carpeting on the walls, and or carpeting, and you got the insulation. You got if you were to get one of these, it's actually like you could move in and live there. What are we talking?
I mean, if we're talking about just the house and not the lot,
Yeah.
I would say you could probably be into it 50 or 60 grand.
So 1,000 for the container, and then you got to hook everything up to it. And what's the biggest expense on top of the container?
So you hit on it. So the utilities.
Okay,
So you have to
gotcha.
get drainage, water, electric to it. That can be one of the biggest things. The foundation, getting the footing right. Getting approvals before you start, that can be pretty expensive too. But that's uh, in comparison to a normal build, I mean that's not the biggest expense. So I mean, in
Yeah.
with a container, that could be the biggest expense, but it's so inexpensive. That's the biggest expense, you know.
S- So, are there other elements that go into, you grew up in pretty low income neighborhood. Are there other elements that go into addressing the housing affordability crisis outside of just giving you a house? Like if you look at homelessness, for example,
Hmm.
there are theories around how you solve homelessness. One of them is housing first.
Hmm.
So you put them in a house and then you're like, okay, now you have shelter. Now you can relax. Now you have a roof over your head. You can have security of a door. Now you can think about like where am I gonna go work and things like that. There's also advocates on the other side of housing first who are like, no, actually, a lot of homeless people are on drugs, for example. Now I won't
Yeah.
necessarily say that's the same case. Homeless and need affordable housing are not the same category of people, but are there other elements that go into this, or do we just need to build, baby, build, and then we get the affordable housing crisis solved?
Yeah, I don't think it's that simple. Yeah, and you did hit the nail on the head. Affordable housing and homelessness are two totally different things. Affordable housing is, families who have that high debt to income ratio, where they're putting their whole check into rent, both mom and dad are working, or if it's single mom, whatever. Um, but they're trying, and their efforts are not being rewarded. Homelessness is something totally different. You know, there's there. I mean, of course, there's some homeless people who just fell on bad luck, and they're trying to figure something out. And you have a lot of them where there's something that they've done, a choice that they made to get them in that circumstance, and getting a better environment for them may not always, and I'm speaking this from a business aspect. And I started in property management when I started real estate. So I've dealt with this quite a bit. Even though you create a better environment for them, it may not be something that's going to help them change who they are or the choices that they make. And that's the unfortunate thing. But to answer your question for affordable housing, yeah, the rural uh, container idea can work fantastically well, being that the property will still maintain its value since it's considered as real property. So
So it's like a little bit of an investment now
it
that
will still be
people
an
who,
investment.
okay,
The house would still have the possibility of appreciating and all that stuff. Banks would loan or give loans for it, so it's easy, to get financing for that, which is the biggest issue for someone who's trying to buy their first house. Um,
mm,
so the homelessness issue, I'm working with two different churches now who have land behind their church, and they're going to start putting pods and ADUs back there, so they can help with that. I think it's a several like step, and you know more about this than I do, but I kind of see it as like a several step process. You definitely don't want someone feeling comfortable and trying to live off government, but you also want to give them a chance, and you want to put them in circumstances where they can win. And if they just don't have the want to win, then that shouldn't be on the person giving the help. You know what I mean? So there's a couple churches that I'm working with that, they're planning on putting some ADUs back there, but they're also having some rehabilitation programs and different things to help people get back on their feet, because that's pretty much what it is. More so, homelessness is more of a mindset than anything else. I mean, and I remember there's times where I was technically homeless too, you know. But I wasn't trying to stay there. And when I got a hand up, I took that hand and I made sure that person that gave me their hand appreciated that they helped me out. So um but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it kind of does. So basically, the idea is housing affordability is just that. It's dollars and cents. It's dollars
Yeah.
and cents and places to live. And
Yep.
so if we want, the college student to be able to, I mean, I'm a millennial. We've accepted that as a generation, we'll never be able to afford a house. It'll never happen. The
Yeah.
the idea that we pay rent far more than mortgage, but that doesn't count in our credit score. So the
Right.
idea that we'll be able to afford a house is ridiculous. But, there's a lot of people who are being pushed out of communities because they don't have affordable housing. And if they have something like this, then the housing could actually be affordable for them to live in. And best of all, it's an investment too.
Yep.
Because one of the biggest problems with the projects is nobody actually owned any of that. That was not it was housing technically, but it wasn't your house. It wasn't your home. It wasn't something you own and can build. And we don't have time to in this episode to get into all of the
That's
areas
a
you.
whole other can of worms. But I was going to mention that there are, I don't know if you ever heard of like any lottery options. Um,
No.
Yeah, yeah. So, low income, let's say single mom applies and she qualifies. She gets to live um, in a neighborhood where, I mean, she definitely can't afford to be there, but she gets, grants or what have you to help her stay there. And as long as, she keeps a job or whatever, that kind of helps. And, to be honest with you, that could be like a solution period. I mean, because if you take a like with me and my mom, for example, she got me out of that environment of gang violence, drugs, and all that stuff. And I got to see a different side of life. It changed my life. um, if that was available, or if that was more widely available, I mean, because there's areas all over the place where, if a person had, just an opportunity to live at a place for a year or two, their lives would change. So
That's a good
I've
point.
heard of a couple areas that have done those lottery programs.
That's a good point, and that's definitely something I want to look into. And if you can send us some links to, our listeners would love to see the 3D printed concrete for sure.
Okay,
Also the shipping containers. But
really
if you've got
freaking
any
cool
links
stuff.
to the lotteries as well, I think our listeners would be fascinated by those. And you know, a solution to housing affordability could just be build baby build and put some of these, a little bit lower income houses in place, give people a chance to get up on their feet. And like you said, being able to be transported out of the environment that they're in right now and into a neighborhood with good schools, which gives their kids a chance to actually maybe go to college or get a high paying trade job or something like that. It's the
Yeah,
people you hang out with that
right,
often determine your life's trajectory, and sometimes getting you out of the people you're currently hanging out with and hang out with a different group of people
yep,
often helps.
right.
And so that's really fascinating. Love these ideas. Where can people go to find out more about you and I suppose buying a house in Raleigh?
Well, you can go to timmclarke.com. That's actually my entire name with .com after it. I have a couple articles about affordable housing, about buying your first house, about the pitfalls you can make from buying a house, the different types of loans that are available, the history of interest rates, a bunch of cool stuff that can, help you kind of get your mindset together in buying. Even some tips and tricks on about the business. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, all same thing, Tim and Clark, and Twitter.
All right, awesome. Well, and of course, now is where I thank our awesome donors who make this show possible. If you like the content on this show and if you like the push for community solutions and changing the debate to include community solutions in America, go to instituteforcommunitysolutions.org/circle, join the solution circle, be a contributing member of the solution circle, help us find more experts like Tim M. Clark, more nonprofits like the Plymouth Improvement Committee help us find these solutions to the problems that we face in our communities today and help us help you solve them. Tim, thank you so much for joining How Do We Solve It? It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Everyone listening, see you guys next week.
Have a good one, guys.